At 7:52 a.m., before the sun even rose over Washington, D.C., Jasmine Crockett walked into a live studio where 17 million would soon witness history, face to face with Clint Eastwood, a legend twice her age, ready to silence her with one cold stare. The topic? Public education versus prison funding. A battle of values, power, and whose America gets to speak. But within 90 seconds, the tone shifted. Her voice didn't rise, but the room stopped breathing. As cameras rolled and producers whispered, one sentence from Jasmine shattered decades of silence. In Clint's composure. What could one woman say on live TV that left a Hollywood icon completely undone? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The lights in Studio 6B roared to life long before the sun crept over Dallas. Their heat fell hard and unrelenting, bouncing off white floors and chrome chairs like interrogation lamps. Producers hovered near the monitors, whispering in clipped tones. "Keep it controlled," one said sharply. "Last month's segment ended in shouting and cost us a sponsor." The air smelled like coffee, hairspray, and quiet dread. The script called this a balanced conversation, but the staff knew better. This wasn't a discussion. It was a detonation waiting for the first spark. Jasmine Crockett entered like a verdict. She didn't stride. She arrived. Blazer dark as midnight, crisp and severe. On her collar, a gold pin caught the light. VOTE. She didn't scan the room for approval. Her gaze cut clean through it, weighing, measuring. When an assistant chirped nervously, "Can I get you water?" "Coffee." She shook her head, sat down, crossed one leg over the other, and asked, "Do you have the last 5 years of Department of Education budget breakdowns? I want to verify the federal to state ratio before we go live." No small talk. No smile. She came prepared for a fight no one else had even rehearsed. Minutes later, Clint Eastwood stepped onto the set. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His arrival was a presence, not a performance. He wore a worn charcoal jacket, the kind with history stitched into every crease. He paused for no one, ignored the powder brush offered by makeup, and took his place with the stillness of an old gunslinger eyeing a distant horizon. The shadow he cast stretched long and hard behind him, slicing the floor like a memory of some black and white war he once filmed, and maybe still thought he was in. They didn't exchange a glance. They didn't speak. But across the wide arc of the studio table, two worlds settled into position. Jasmine, young, sharp, alert. Clint, unshaken, seasoned, unyielding. A silence more deafening than applause settled over the room. It wasn't peace. It was pressure. And everyone watching knew it. History was about to break through the screen. The silence hung for a moment longer, sharp and weighted, as if the room itself was holding its breath. Then, like a knife slipping beneath the skin, Raymond's voice entered, polite, measured, designed to diffuse what everyone already knew was coming. "Congresswoman Crockett," he said, glancing briefly between his cue card and the woman sitting straight back across from Clint Eastwood. "You've suggested that a sizable portion of federal prison funding should be reallocated toward education and school infrastructure. Some say that's unrealistic. Others go further, calling it, frankly, idealistic. How do you respond to that?" Jasmine didn't even look at Raymond. Her eyes remained fixed slightly past the camera, like she was speaking to someone beyond the lights, someone who lived this. Her tone was calm, but it carried a tension beneath it, like piano wire pulled taut. "People call it idealism," she began, "because they have never stood in a public school hallway that smells like mildew and broken air conditioning." She turned her head slightly, just enough to make sure Clint could hear it all. "They've never opened a math book held together with duct tape or watched a substitute teacher cry in the parking lot because she's been covering a classroom for 8 weeks without a contract. They call it a dream," she said, voice dipping lower, slower, "because their reality is insulated by wealth and comfort. But for millions of kids, especially black, brown, and poor kids, this country's priorities are a nightmare." She leaned forward slightly. Her eyes didn't waver. 3 weeks ago, I visited a school in Beaumont. 3rd grade classroom, 32 students, 1 teacher, no teaching aide. Their science materials? A decade old. They're learning about climate change with a globe that still shows the USSR. And when I asked what they needed most, the teacher said, to not have to buy glue sticks with my own money. She paused, letting it hang in the air like a verdict. And yet, this government has a budget that spends 3 times more per prisoner than per pupil. Her fingers tapped once, sharp against the table. That's not policy. That's pathology. The studio was dead still now. No one shifted. No one looked at their phones. Jasmine's voice was steady, but it carried the heat of someone who had lived too long with polite silence. When I say we should move money from mass incarceration to public education, I'm not dreaming. I'm reacting. Reacting to a country that built pipelines from school to prison so efficiently it didn't even need blueprints. I've met 12-year-olds suspended for rolling their eyes at underpaid security guards. Meanwhile, billionaire tax cheats get book deals and beachfront homes. She inhaled slowly. Idealism is believing we can keep funding punishment and still call ourselves just. What I'm suggesting? That's not utopia. That's triage. Raymond looked stunned, momentarily forgetting the next question. In the control room, a producer whispered, "We need to clip that for the highlights." That was the moment. But inside the studio, no one was thinking about ratings. Clint Eastwood hadn't moved. His arms were crossed, his jaw clenched, but his posture had shifted by half an inch, just enough for those watching closely to notice. Jasmine didn't stop. Her words sharpened. "You know what's unrealistic, Raymond? Expecting a child who's hungry, ignored, and under-resourced to grow up and respect a system that never invested in them. You want lower crime? Invest before the crime happens? You want discipline? Start by showing dignity. Because what I've seen, what I've lived, isn't some lofty dream. It's a slow bleed of a broken promise, and I'm here to cauterize it." The moment settled like embers in dry grass, still, glowing, waiting, until Jasmine leaned in once more, her voice tightening like a wire about to snap. She didn't raise her tone. She didn't need to. Her calm carried a sharper edge than any shout ever could. "There's a school in my district that shut down for 10 days straight last summer," she began, her words crisp, deliberate. "Mid-July, heat index soaring over 108. The air conditioning system failed. Old, neglected, patched together for years with duct tape and wishful thinking. Classrooms became ovens. A boy had a nosebleed at his desk. A girl fainted during homeroom. The nurse was overwhelmed. They sent kids home with handwritten notes saying, 'We'll try again when it cools down.'" She paused, but not to breathe. She paused so the shame could land. Her eyes shifted slightly toward Clint, but her focus remained razor thin. "Now let me paint the other side of the street, literally, not metaphorically, just across the road. Crescent Hills Prep. Tuition? $28,000 a year. Their HVAC system is automated by sensor. Their floors are marble. Their gymnasium has filtered water dispensers every 15 feet. They never closed. Not once. While public school children baked in unlivable heat, Crescent Hills students were reviewing summer enrichment packets in chilled classrooms under skylights." She turned back to the camera. "Don't talk to me about equality if 2 zip codes can determine whether a child gets air or heat stroke." The room had gone so quiet the audience could hear the soft hiss of a light buzzing overhead. Jasmine didn't blink. "I've heard people say, 'Well, that's unfortunate.' No, a fallen tree during a storm is unfortunate. This isn't a storm, it's design. The system isn't broken. It was engineered meticulously to privilege those with while rationing survival to those without. It's not some abstract flaw. It's policy. It's zoning. It's history that still lives in building codes and bond measures and school board meetings where voices like mine were never invited." She leaned slightly forward, her palms now pressed gently to the desk, steady as a surgeon about to cut deep. "And when I say shift funding from mass incarceration to public education, I'm not making a moral plea. I'm demanding that we stop treating children like liabilities until they become threats. You want to prevent crime?" She tapped her finger once. "Cool their classrooms. Feed them. Give them updated books and teachers who don't burn out by October. That's not charity, that's common sense." Clint sat motionless, arms crossed, his face unreadable, But the stiffness in his jaw gave him away. He let the silence stretch, perhaps out of confidence, perhaps out of calculation. And then, in a voice aged with grit and smoke, he fired back. "Compassion is admirable," he said flatly, "but it doesn't build civilizations. The founding fathers didn't build this country with emotions. They built it with rules, with law, with discipline." His tone never shifted. To him, that was final. Jasmine didn't answer immediately. She tilted her head just slightly, and then, just the faintest curl of a smile, sharp as broken glass. "Maybe they didn't cry," she said softly, her voice like a scalpel against stone. "But I doubt they skipped dinner because their mother had to choose between the electric bill and groceries." Her eyes locked onto his. "I doubt they learned to read in a room where mold grew above the blackboard and rats chewed through the construction paper on the bulletin boards." She exhaled, not to calm herself but to clear space for what was next. "You speak of order like it was handed down from the mountaintop, but for millions of us, there was no order, only survival. You speak of discipline, I speak of dignity, and the difference between the two is whether you've ever had to earn your place at a table that wasn't built for you." Nobody moved. Not Clint, not the audience, not even the cameraman whose lens had been trained on her without blinking. In that moment, the room didn't just hear her, they felt her. And it wasn't idealism, it was indictment, burned into every syllable. The tension hadn't yet settled from Jasmine's searing indictment when Raymond, sensing the room tilting towards something raw and unscripted, tried to thread it back to safer ground. He leaned forward with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach his eyes and said, "Let me ask both of you this. How do we bridge the generational divide? The one between those who built this country and those now pushing to reshape it." His voice was smooth, almost hopeful, but there was a tremble just beneath it, a crack in the moderator's composure that even the studio lights couldn't burn away. The question was meant to neutralize, to reset the emotional weight in the room. Instead, it detonated the next phase of collision. Clint Eastwood didn't blink. He turned his body a fraction, not fully toward Jasmine, but no longer away. His hands folded slowly across his chest, knuckles pale under the pressure. Then he spoke, and his voice was no longer grandfatherly. It was cutting, measured, dangerous. "You don't bridge generations," he said, "by tearing down what came before you." The sentence rang out like the opening line of a closing argument. "Too many of these new voices," he went on, his tone tightening with every word, "aren't interested in understanding the past. They're rewriting it, discarding it, like wisdom has an expiration date, or like history was written just to offend them." His fingers drummed once against the desk, slow, almost disdainful. "Real leadership," he said, voice gaining that signature Eastwood grit, "isn't something you earn by trending online. It doesn't come from hashtags, or hashtags pretending to be movements. It doesn't come from slogans on cardboard signs waved between selfies." The audience was still, not because they agreed, but because the temperature in the room had changed. He wasn't just answering the question, he was carving a target into it. "Leadership," he continued, "comes from knowing when to step back, when to stay quiet, when to do the damn work without turning it into theater." He leaned forward just slightly now, the lights carving harsh shadows beneath his brow. "That's what the founders understood. Duty, not noise. Strength, not sensitivity. Discipline, not drama." And then, like a blade drawn with intent, he let the final words drop with slow venom. "Especially from those trying to turn politics into performance, particularly the women who think this is their game now. Trying to play a man's game like they invented struggle yesterday." The silence that followed wasn't shocked. It was surgical, deliberate. Even the oxygen in the room seemed to retreat. One of the stage hands in the wings dropped a headset, and the crack of plastic against concrete sounded like glass breaking in a mausoleum. A member of the camera crew instinctively adjusted his focus, but didn't dare breathe. Inside the control booth, no one spoke. No one cued commercial. No one touched a single dial. In that instant, Clint didn't just speak from another era. He weaponized it. He had drawn a line, not with facts, not even with debate, but with the kind of coded arrogance that didn't need to shout to humiliate. He didn't need to look directly at Jasmine. The line had already found her. It was the line women like her had heard their entire lives, wrapped in condescension, dressed as order, delivered like truth. And yet across from him sat a woman who had heard worse in silence, in courtrooms, in boardrooms, and in campaign stops where hands lingered too long on her back. She wasn't stunned. She was steel. But for the briefest moment, the entire studio froze, balanced perfectly on the edge of something unspoken, something heavy, something irreparable. The moment Clint believed he'd reasserted control was the moment the room began to turn. Clint's final words sat in the center of the room like a lit fuse, crackling, deliberate, unchallenged for now. But Jasmine didn't rush to reply. She inhaled slowly, held the silence in her lungs, and let it stretch. 5 seconds, then 6. On the 7th second, she moved, not with outrage, not with showmanship, but with clarity that cut colder than fury ever could. She didn't lean forward. She didn't lift her voice. She simply turned her gaze toward Clint and said almost gently, "You think I'm performing?" The words floated across the table like smoke before a fire. Calm, clean, deadly. The camera zoomed in slightly. The air around her seemed to still. "You think this is an audition?" she asked, her voice so soft the microphones almost missed the first syllable. "You think I showed up today to be seen? I've spent most of my life trying to not be seen the wrong way, trying to prove I belong in rooms where I was expected to fail quietly." Her eyes didn't flinch. "You can afford to think this is theater. I can't, because where I come from, if you hesitate, someone else speaks over you. If you speak too soon, they say you're emotional. And if you don't speak at all, they erase you like you were never there." She exhaled once, slow, surgical. "My mother was a nurse in South Dallas. She worked night shifts at a county hospital for 18 years. Not a glamorous clinic, a trauma center, blood, screams, no budget. She worked so much we only saw her face at 6 a.m., when her scrubs still smelled like antiseptic and fatigue. One night, she collapsed in the break room bathroom. Her body just gave out. They found her on the tile floor with her ID badge pressed into her neck. She didn't go home. She didn't call in. She finished her shift. She took a 2-hour nap in her car and walked back into that building to check vitals for patients who didn't know her name. That's the kind of woman who raised me." Her hands were still folded, her posture unmoved. But the edge in her voice had crystallized. "You want to talk about sacrifice?" she continued, now barely louder than a whisper but twice as sharp. "Sacrifice isn't writing your name on a statue. It's being too tired to stand but showing up anyway, because no one else will. It's holding broken systems together with your bare hands, while people who've never set foot in your world tell you to be grateful." She let the silence breathe again, but now it was the silence of command, not reaction. Then her voice shifted, lower, deeper. "There was a boy I represented once. 12 years old, first generation, smart, too smart. He asked his 7th grade teacher why Black history only got 3 pages in the textbook. He asked, 'Why don't we talk about anything that happened after Martin Luther King died?' He didn't yell. He didn't insult. He asked a question." Her lips pressed into a line for a moment. The school called it defiance. They called his curiosity a disruption. They suspended him. 3 days. I met him when his mother called my office in tears. They didn't see a curious child. They saw a future threat. That's what it means to be judged before you grow." Her focus now locked fully on Clint, her voice steady, but hardening like stone in slow freeze. "So no, I'm not performing, I'm surviving. Every word I say on this stage is one I've calculated, one I've earned, because if I slip, even for a moment, it doesn't just cost me. It costs the people I speak for, the ones who never get invited to this table, the ones who are told to be grateful for crumbs while others inherit the feast." She held the pause just long enough to make the entire room sit in it. And then softly, "This is not a performance. This is the consequence of being real in a world that rewards pretending you don't see what's broken." The lights didn't flicker. The cameras didn't pan. But the mood shifted, like a fault line had quietly cracked beneath the floor. The silence following Jasmine's last statement still lingered in the studio air. Dense, unmoving. When Clint leaned forward, clearing his throat with a soft, deliberate rasp that felt more like warning than reflex. His voice was steady, but the tone had shifted. Not defensive, not shaken, just colder, more brittle, the way glass sounds right before it shatters. "Look," he said, "I respect anyone willing to serve this country. I do." He nodded once, as if offering her a gesture of civility before slamming the door behind it. "But don't turn service into spectacle. Don't turn politics into a stage for emotional monologues." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He had perfected the art of belittlement wrapped in discipline, of dressing condescension as concern. He continued, his fingers tightening on the edge of the desk, jaw set. "Politics used to be about facts, numbers, proposals. Now it's feelings. Everyone's trying to out-trauma each other. We used to solve problems. Now we narrate them. And somehow that's supposed to be leadership." His gaze flicked toward Jasmine, sharp but controlled. "Feelings don't build bridges," he said, "and hashtags don't pass laws. Discipline does, knowing when to do the work and when to stay quiet." Then came the last line, as if loaded and saved for the moment he wanted to draw real blood, especially for those trying to force their way into arenas they weren't built for. People who mistake microphones for merit. A pause, particularly the women who think loudness equals leadership. The words didn't explode. They slid like poison under the skin. Quiet, invasive, deadly. For a beat, the entire set seemed to falter. Not a sound, not a shift. Even the lighting felt sharper, harsher, like the air itself had gone brittle with tension. In the control booth, a producer's hand froze above the cut-to-break button. A stage hand near the camera clutched the corner of a cue card so tightly it crinkled audibly. Everyone knew they'd crossed into something deeper than debate, into the territory where power no longer hides behind language, but weaponizes it. Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't raise a brow, didn't shift in her chair, didn't even blink more than once. She let Clint's words hang in the air like smoke from a spent cartridge. Then, with a calm that didn't ask for silence but commanded it, she spoke. Her voice didn't rise. It sank deeper. "I don't confuse loudness with being right," she said, her words slow and deliberate, like she was placing them one by one on a scale of history. "But I also know this. Silence has never saved people who look like me." She paused, not for drama, but for truth to settle into the bones of the room. "It didn't save us when they closed schools instead of fixing them. It didn't save us when our communities were over-policed and underfunded. It didn't save us when we buried loved ones whose names never made the news." Her eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in focus, like a surgeon before the incision. "Silence," she said again, lower this time, "is what people like me have been told to master while watching others mistake comfort for courage." And then, without shifting tone, volume, or posture, she delivered the line that would be etched into headlines, textbooks, TikToks, and late-night segments for years to come. Her voice was barely above a whisper, yet somehow louder than anything else that had been said. "Maybe I'm not too much. Maybe you've been too little for too long." No one moved. No one reacted. The oxygen seemed to leave the room, not with force, but with precision, like someone had sealed every vent. The audience didn't gasp. They didn't applaud. They froze. Raymond sat motionless, his hands still resting on the desk but visibly clenched. Clint's face was unreadable, but something behind his eyes flickered. Recognition, perhaps, or the slow realization that control had quietly slipped from his grasp. In that moment, it wasn't about who was louder or sharper. It wasn't even about politics anymore. It was about the fault line that had finally, undeniably split right down the center of the American conversation. And Jasmine Crockett, without raising her voice, had just drawn the line in permanent ink. The room was paralyzed in silence, but Jasmine didn't pause to enjoy it. She didn't need the moment to catch up to her. She owned it now, not with volume, but with velocity. And so, for the first time, she turned her body toward the center camera. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but the gesture carried weight, because this wasn't for Clint anymore. It wasn't for Raymond, the studio, or the thousands watching live. It was for the one person whose voice hadn't been invited into the room. Jasmine's gaze locked into the lens, her face calm, almost maternal. But beneath that calm, there was iron. "There is a little girl watching this right now," she said, her voice soft, slow, yet unshakably firm. "I don't know her name. I don't know where she is. But I know what she's been told, because I was told the same things." She let the air stretch, her tone never wavering. "She's been told she's too loud, too emotional, that her questions are disruptive. She's been told that her leadership makes people uncomfortable, and that her ambition needs to be adjusted. Not because she's wrong, but because her presence makes others feel small." Jasmine's eyes didn't blink. Maybe she's sitting in a classroom right now, raising her hand for the 5th time and watching her teacher choose someone else. Maybe she's on a debate team where she's the only black girl, and when she speaks with force, they call it aggression instead of intellect. Maybe she's at home, watching this from behind a cracked phone screen while someone in the next room tells her to keep it down. A slight breath. "I want to tell her, no, I need to tell her, you are not wrong." Her voice dipped into something deeper now, not a register of sound, but of memory. "I was that girl. I know what it feels like to carry brilliance in a room that only wants your silence, to have truth burning inside you while adults, principals, deans, politicians look through you like furniture." Her hands remained still, fingers lightly clasped on the table before her. "And I remember every time I lowered my voice to fit the room, every time I edited myself for someone else's comfort. I remember the weight of that disguise, how heavy it became, and I remember the exact moment I dropped it." The studio remained frozen, and yet the atmosphere shifted. Less like a performance, more like an altar had been built in plain sight. "There are generations of women who never made it to these microphones," Jasmine continued, her voice now filled with quiet reverence. "Women who organized campaigns but were never given credit. Women who drafted policy on yellow legal pads in basements, while men took the podium upstairs. Women who outperformed every man in the room and were still called unlikable." She didn't tear up. She didn't tremble. She carried their memory like a shield. "We are taught to believe that power comes with permission, that if we wait our turn, speak softly and smile often enough, we'll be let in. But the truth is, doors like these weren't built for us. We had to build our own keys." Then came the pause, a breath, a silence so complete it demanded reverence. And then she said it, not as a slogan, not as a flourish, but as a contract with every girl on the other side of that screen. "If even one girl, just one, hears this and realizes that standing up doesn't make her wrong, then every second of this debate was worth it." The lights didn't dim. The cameras didn't cut. But in that moment, something unspoken cracked open, not in the studio, but in the hearts of those watching. Because she hadn't just spoken to that girl. She had named her. She had freed her. As Jasmine's final words left the studio wrapped in steel and purpose, the moment didn't end. It detonated. And by the time the cameras powered down, the real storm had already begun to spread far beyond those walls. It started with a clip, 29 seconds. Low resolution, clipped by a junior intern on a borrowed editing station before the show had even wrapped. It caught Jasmine's calm gaze into the camera, the sentence that had landed like thunder in a locked room. "Maybe I'm not too much. Maybe you've been too little for too long." Within minutes, it was posted to Twitter with a caption that read simply, "She didn't raise her voice, she raised the bar." 5,000 shares, then 20, then trending. A side-by-side TikTok was next. Jasmine's face on the left, a wide shot of Clint Eastwood blinking on the right, captioned, "The old guard just got audited." It hit 300,000 likes before lunch on the West Coast. By sundown, a YouTube reel had surfaced with edits cut to music, violins swelling, her words subtitled in bold white font. 72 hours later, the soundbite was being remixed over protest montages, gym workouts, and even makeup tutorials. But beneath the virality, something deeper was unfolding, a reckoning. By nightfall, America's media war rooms had deployed. On CNN, Jasmine was framed as the voice of a rising generation, A woman who had challenged legacy with composure, weaponized truth without shouting. They invited civil rights scholars, young activists, a former education secretary who said, what she did wasn't disrespect. It was necessary. On MSNBC, a host played the moment in full, then simply said, if you're more uncomfortable with her tone than his message, you're not ready for equity. Meanwhile, over on Fox News, the same clip ran, but slowed down, flattened, stripped of its heat and context. The Chiron read, Crockett embarrasses herself in live meltdown, disrespects national icon. They cut off her quote halfway, right before the word dignity. A guest panelist, face flushed and shaking his head, said, this is what happens when we trade statesmanship for social media points. The host nodded solemnly, as if Jasmine had just personally dismantled the Lincoln Memorial. The divide wasn't just visible, it was surgical. One nation, split across channels, interpreting the same 30 seconds as either a declaration of war or a long overdue release. The New York Times published an op-ed titled, When Respect Meets Resistance, while the Daily Caller countered with the death of civility in a hashtag age. In both articles, her face was everywhere. Some still images capturing the precision of her glare, others frozen mid-sentence, framed as if she'd shouted when she hadn't even raised her voice. On Reddit, a thread titled, Did Jasmine Just End Clint Eastwood's Public Persona? Gained 15,000 upvotes in 2 hours. The top comment read, She didn't destroy him. She exposed the scaffolding. A reply underneath said, She was everything they told me to never be, and that's why it worked. But the backlash came with venom. On conservative forums, her inbox was doxxed. A political cartoon circulated, showing her as a puppet held by radical youth. Someone even launched a parody account mocking her as Senator Screech. A few right-wing influencers demanded her resignation. She should apologize to Clint Eastwood right now. One man thundered on a podcast titled American Manhood Reborn. He ranted for 40 minutes. Jasmine's actual segment had been under 7. The irony was lost on him. And yet, beneath the digital noise, beneath the arguments and algorithms, was a quieter storm, a shift. Women began filming themselves reading Jasmine's quote aloud in their native languages: Spanish, Korean, Swahili, Urdu. A librarian in Boston posted a photo of her daughter taping the words to her mirror. A high school debate coach in Nebraska emailed her team, We're opening with this next week. No edits, no commentary, just her voice. Meanwhile, back in the Capitol, Jasmine's phone never stopped vibrating. Not with trolls, but with quiet texts. Thank you. I saw myself in you. I've waited a decade to hear someone say that out loud. She hadn't planned to become a symbol. She didn't rehearse for it. She simply answered a man who thought silence was strength, and in doing so, shattered the illusion that discipline belongs to one gender, one generation, or one type of voice. And now that voice, her voice, was everywhere. Not because it shouted, but because it didn't flinch. Because it held the line. And because in 30 unassuming seconds, it made millions ask a question they weren't ready for. Why are we so threatened by a woman who speaks without asking first? While Jasmine's words rippled like aftershocks across a fractured nation, Clint Eastwood, silent until now, decided to reclaim the spotlight, not with apology, but with something colder. Revision. It was 24 hours after the now viral interview, and the temperature across American discourse hadn't cooled. It had calcified. That night, Clint Eastwood appeared on The American Hour, a primetime show known for soft landings and reverent nostalgia. The studio backdrop behind him was a sepia-toned American flag, fluttering gently in digital wind. He entered wearing the same jacket from the panel, charcoal gray, rigid, unreconstructed. The host, Jack Barton, welcomed him like an old general returning from battle. "It's good to see you, sir," Jack said, his voice warm, measured, reverent. "We know you've been through quite a whirlwind the past 24 hours. Clint nodded once, almost dismissively. He didn't smile. He rarely did, especially when he believed he was under siege. The show cut to a montage, a spliced-together reel of Jasmine's most quoted line played next to online reactions, alternating between adoring praise and harsh critique. Then Jack leaned forward and asked the question America had been waiting to hear. Some people say your comments yesterday were out of step, that they were dismissive, especially toward women in leadership. Do you feel in hindsight that maybe you went too far? The air on set tightened. Clint stared at the desk for a moment, then looked up, not with humility, but with the slow burn of someone doubling down. No, he said flatly. I said what a lot of people are thinking, but don't have the guts to say on television. He paused, letting the words hang like smoke over a battlefield. I'm not here to apologize for speaking plainly. We've got too many politicians trying to win sympathy, not respect. That's not leadership. It's performance. And I wasn't raised to reward performance. The clip hit Twitter within 3 minutes. By 5, it was on TikTok with a caption that read, "Gaslighting 101, old power won't let go." The backlash was immediate and ferocious. Thousands of young users reposted the clip side by side with footage of women being interrupted in courtrooms, in boardrooms, in Senate chambers. A psychologist stitched the segment with commentary on defensive narcissism and generational fragility. The phrase, "I said what many think," exploded across timelines, not as a defense, but as an indictment. One user tweeted, translation, "I miss the days when I could be casually sexist without trending by breakfast." But the firestorm wasn't just digital. It reignited every wound the original moment had opened. Jasmine, who had remained silent since the panel, suddenly found herself cast again, not by her own words, but by Clint's revision of them. He didn't address her name. He didn't mention the quote that had stopped the country. He reframed it all, himself as the rational voice, her as a spark plug of emotion, the moment as an overreaction by an overactive generation. He didn't rebut what she said. He erased why she said it. On MSNBC, a political strategist called it a masterclass in manufactured dismissal. On Fox News, the panel praised his stoicism. One host declared, "Clint Eastwood reminded us tonight what real masculinity looks like, unapologetic." But to millions online, the image of a man sitting under stage lights, calmly rewriting the story he started, was anything but masculine. It was haunting. It was familiar. It was the exact dynamic Jasmine had warned against. Power masquerading as reason, dominance disguised as decorum. The quote itself mutated into a symbol. Protest signs began appearing. "I said what many are thinking, so you weren't supposed to hear us think it aloud." Editorial cartoons drew Clint sitting in front of a fireplace, his mouth open, but Jasmine's words coming out. The Atlantic published a full-page feature titled, "When Erasure Poses as Clarity." Underneath it, a single pull quote. He didn't answer her. He removed her from the scene. And through it all, Jasmine remained silent. No rebuttal, no soundbite, no tweet. Her team declined interviews. Her official pages posted nothing. But the silence didn't feel like surrender. It felt tactical. Because while Clint tried to reshape the past with a single quote, the world had already moved on without him. His words landed like an echo in a room that was no longer listening. The world wasn't interested in what was once permitted. It was watching what had been exposed. Back on the American Hour, the interview ended with polite applause. The kind that comes from obligation, not conviction. Clint left the set to quiet handshakes and whispered thank yous. But no one called it a moment, because everyone, on every side, could feel it. This wasn't a man defending truth. It was a man trying to make the truth smaller than it had become. And truth, once spoken without apology, never fits back into the box built to silence it. While Clint attempted to recast the moment from a polished studio chair, the world outside his frame had already taken Jasmine's words, held them up to the light, and begun setting them on fire. It started like a spark in dry grass, quiet, sudden, impossible to contain. A 21-year-old marketing assistant in Atlanta uploaded a selfie-style video at 2:03 a.m. No ring light, no background music, just her face, tear-streaked but steady. "Last year," she whispered, "my boss told me I was too assertive in meetings. I believed him. I stopped talking. I started shrinking." She inhaled shakily. "Then I saw Jasmine Crockett look into that camera and say, 'Maybe I'm not too much.' And I realized, maybe I'm not either." The caption read, "I won't shrink again." Within 12 hours, The clip had over 2 million views. By nightfall, there were hundreds more like it. Young women across the country, black, brown, white, first-gen, queer, immigrant, posting raw, unedited testimonies. Confessions turned into declarations. Apologies transformed into vows. On TikTok, the movement found its visual language. One trend showed women standing in boardrooms, classroom doors, kitchens, and courthouse steps, each mouthing Jasmine's now iconic words. "I don't get to perform, I live this." Another featured women removing metaphorical masks, cutting out phrases like, "I'm just lucky to be here," and "sorry for interrupting," before lip-syncing her closer. This isn't theater, it's survival. The soundbite became a trending audio under the title, "Not Too Much," and the hashtag #SpeakLikeCrockett hit 10 million uses in under 3 days. But it wasn't just social media, it was ripple turning to current. Podcasts released emergency episodes within 48 hours of the panel. A popular series called Body Politics dropped a 90-minute breakdown titled Tone versus Truth, what Jasmine Crockett just did to American discourse. Hosts analyzed every frame, how Jasmine's hands remained folded even as her words drew blood, how her eyes never once flinched under pressure, how her silence felt louder than her sentences. They called it a master class in composure under calculated attack. One linguist joined a separate roundtable and spoke about the deliberate cadence of her delivery, how she chose not to spike her voice or soften it, but instead sat squarely in the register of power that wasn't seeking approval. Vloggers weighed in too. A popular Gen Z creator known as @AvaUnfiltered uploaded a video titled, "Why Jasmine Crockett Made Me Unapologetic Overnight." In it, she played the entire 7-second pause before Jasmine responded to Clint, saying, "Do you feel that? That silence? That's a woman deciding not to flinch when the world expects her to." The comments beneath exploded with stories. "I was told to be less passionate in law school. I was the only girl in my tech firm and learned to whisper in meetings. I needed this. I needed her." And then came the classroom. In a public high school in Cincinnati, Miss Eleanor Medina, a civics teacher with 20 years in the district, dimmed the projector lights and played the segment for her 11th grade government and society class. The room, usually drowsy by 8 a.m., fell into complete stillness. Jasmine's voice cut through the space with an intimacy that whiteboards and textbooks could never replicate. When the video ended, Miss Medina didn't ask for reactions. She didn't have to. A Latina student in the front row raised her hand and said, "Why have we never studied someone like her before?" Another added, "That wasn't just an answer. That was armor." Ms. Medina nodded once, and for the first time all semester, rewrote her lesson plan on the spot. "Today," she said, "we're going to talk about how leadership looks different than we've been taught." Across the country, similar moments unfolded. Teachers played Jasmine's clip in debate classes, media literacy courses, even history periods typically reserved for dead men in powdered wigs. One middle school counselor printed her quote and taped it outside her office door. In Berkeley, a sociology professor added the panel segment to their syllabus under the new unit: Power, Gender, and Precision. A university student newspaper called it the first viral moment in years that didn't beg for your attention. It demanded your reflection. Yet for all the celebration, the backlash surged in equal force. Comment sections overflowed with the usual bile. Race baiting. Feminist nonsense. Another angry liberal trying to cancel tradition. One conservative influencer mocked the TikTok trend by staging a parody video. He sat in a suit, mimicked Jasmine's posture, then burst out laughing before delivering her quote in a cartoon voice. The clip was taken down for harassment within hours, but not before being reposted by dozens of reactionaries calling her a crisis actor for the progressive left. Still, the impact refused to be reduced to ridicule. Jasmine's silence became its own kind of message. She didn't repost the edits, didn't comment on the trends, didn't bask in the viral waves. Her restraint was interpreted by some as strategy, by others as strength. But one thing was undeniable: her face, her voice, her presence, once dismissed as too much, had become the standard by which young women were measuring their own. Because what Jasmine had done was not just speak truth to power. She gave others the language, the body, the breath, to speak it too. And when someone who has been silenced finally speaks, the most radical thing you can do is listen. As Jasmine's silence became a symbol and her voice an anthem, the nation turned its attention to the man across from her, not for what he had said, but for what he had tried to keep buried. The flood began with a single voice, quiet but sharp, the kind that slices cleaner than rage. A woman in her mid-40s, former campaign aide to Clint Eastwood during his short-lived political advisory tenure in the early 2000s, posted a letter to Medium. No frills, no disclaimers, just the title, "I was there, and I remember." In the opening paragraph, she recalled being 22, fresh out of Stanford, hired onto Eastwood's campaign communications team. "It was a dream job," she wrote, "until I realized the only thing I was allowed to offer was coffee or silence." The post caught traction within hours, boosted by journalists, organizers, and quiet retweets from public figures who never said her name but knew her story. She didn't accuse him of harassment. She didn't need to. Her indictment came in the form of dismissal, years of meetings where her voice was waved off, of suggestions discarded until repeated by a man 2 seats over. But the line that ignited the internet came midway through the second page. "Clint didn't shout. He didn't need to. He just looked at me once and said, 'You're smart, but too young and too female. You'll burn out if you try to lead.'" That quote alone was enough to reopen wounds for millions of women who had heard the same sentiment in different words, behind different desks, from men just like him. By midday, the story had been picked up by Politico, HuffPost, and The Guardian. But what truly detonated the moment wasn't the letter. It was the leak. An email from 2012 surfaced, released by a former chief of staff after internal documents were subpoenaed in a separate political investigation. In the exchange, Clint had responded to a proposed appointment of a female attorney to a judicial ethics board. His reply, terse and unfiltered, read, "She's bright, sure, but put her under pressure and she'll cry." Do we really want another meltdown on live TV? The email had been forwarded to 2 senior staffers and a Republican donor. One had replied with a laughing emoji. The internet didn't pause, it erupted. Screenshots of the email spread like blood in water. Hashtags morphed overnight. Two female began trending alongside us meltdown politics. Women began stitching the quote into their social posts, not to mock him, but to weaponize his words against him. One influencer posted a video of herself crying in a bathroom stall after being dismissed by a boardroom full of men. Her caption read, "This is what you feared, Clint? Then you feared the wrong thing." Cable news seized the story. CNN hosted a panel of former staffers and campaign veterans, men and women alike, who began sharing stories. A former scheduler recalled being told not to wear red lipstick around Clint because he finds it distracting. Another revealed she had written entire press statements later attributed to her male supervisor. And suddenly, the man who had sat stone-faced on the American Hour, confident in his stoicism, found himself being recast, not as a weathered hero of a bygone era, but as a relic of its rot. But perhaps what made the moment volcanic wasn't just the letter or the email. It was the timing. It came just as young women across America were rediscovering their power, standing taller because of Jasmine's words, shedding fear, finding new posture in old rooms. And now they were asking a question Clint hadn't prepared for. What else have you silenced? Because if his on-air remark wasn't an anomaly but a pattern, then what else had he edited out of the record? What voices had never made it past the draft stage because someone like him decided they weren't ready? Op-eds exploded. The Washington Tribune ran a front-page editorial titled, "Not a Legend." A scathing paragraph read, "Eastwood didn't just underestimate Jasmine Crockett. He underestimated every woman who'd ever sat in silence and swallowed her brilliance for the comfort of a man who refused to listen." Meanwhile, right-wing pundits scrambled to reframe the fallout. "Cancel culture's back," one declared on air. "They want to erase a lifetime of service because of 1 or 2 sentences. But the words were never the problem. It was the worldview behind them. the slow, quiet erosion of women's presence in rooms of power. And now that erosion had a face. Even Eastwood's own biographers, longtime defenders of his legacy, found themselves grappling. One, in an NPR interview, said, "He was a symbol of American grit for decades, but grit without accountability becomes mythology, and myth, when cracked, spills truth." Through it all, Jasmine Crockett said nothing. Her silence grew louder as the noise around Clint turned chaotic. She didn't have to speak. The world was doing the math for her. If one moment had triggered this much exposure, how much had gone unseen? How many women had held their stories in their throats for decades, afraid of backlash, of being called too much, or worse, not being believed at all? Because in the end, legacy isn't just about what a man builds, it's also about what he breaks on the way. And now, as the nation re-examined the man who had once embodied the strong, silent American archetype, they began to ask, was his silence strength or just a smokescreen? Just when the echoes from Clint's reconciliation attempt began to fade, Jasmine's office inbox exploded, revealing that the battlefield had moved off-screen and into her real life. The first message arrived at 3:17 a.m. Its sender was anonymous, an untraceable email address, a red flag, no subject line, only 3 terse sentences. "You humiliated an American icon. Be careful when you leave your house." The glass in Jasmine's office felt colder when she read it. Outside, the city lights blurred in the early dawn. Inside, the words pulsed like warnings. Invisible, unrelenting, disallowed. She looked at her staff. They avoided her gaze. The seriousness wasn't lost on them. Security protocol activated. They had thought the war was over after the debate. But this was different. It was intimate, personal, warning not just to knock her down, but to make her afraid to stand again. And yet, even as fear threaded through their corridors, something else poured in, like light flooding a locked room. Thousands of emails from women, from girls, from mothers, veterans, teachers, nurses. Each subject line began with, "Thank you," followed by stories of being silenced. "Thank you for saying what my parents told me to swallow. Thank you for words women like me could never speak. Thank you for fighting while I couldn't." They were stark and soulful, earnest delineations of pain and gratitude. One said, "Because of you, I marched into my boss's office and asked for a promotion." Another wrote, "My 14-year-old daughter heard your pause and learned she didn't need to wait." Jasmine reread one particular letter until the ink bled warm on her phone screen. Young woman confessed she'd been passed over for a job after being called too aggressive, too loud, too black. But hearing Jasmine had given her permission to speak, to persist, to step forward, changed everything. The room felt electric, like she was no longer standing alone. Her cause had become their cause. But the threat and the hope existed on the same plane now, and she couldn't ignore either. She paced the office, hardwood floors creaking beneath her boots, as she weighed her next move. The optics of a woman preparing to go dark, to cancel interviews, to retreat into security. Would that silence echo louder than the threats? She had been advised as much. Lay low. Don't give him more oxygen. But her mother called just as the sun began to rise. Jasmine held the phone like a lifeline. Her mother's voice was soft, but unflinching. "Don't let them scare you," she said. "You didn't fight your whole life to vanish from sound when people finally started listening. You don't stay quiet now. No ifs, no questions, just certainty, a moral bolt sealing her resolve." Jasmine's fingers tightened on the phone. She inhaled deliberately. Fear was still there. It had no right to leave, but so was something stronger. Commitment. She realized that backing down now wouldn't stop the threats. It would signal victory to the silencing forces. And she didn't do this for herself. She did it because of that little girl on the screen, because of the women writing their futures again. So she stepped into the light. Scrolling through the emails one more time, she selected a few with public blessing to highlight on national television and on her social accounts. She took a deep breath. The desk was her podium. The emails were her armor. And she would be seen and heard, not just as a voice on TV, but as a face facing fear itself. Because bravery doesn't just come from winning the spotlight. It comes from standing in it while knowing someone wants to turn it off. After days of death threats and declarations of gratitude, Jasmine realized the real battleground wasn't a television studio. It was the future itself. And this time, the spotlight didn't scare her. It called her. The double doors of the Senate hearing room opened slowly, deliberately, mahogany paneled, guarded by marble columns, and lined with cameras humming in near-silent expectation. The gold-plated sign on the wall read, Committee on Generational Policy and Public Futures. Beneath it, 60 senators sat in attention, flanked by aides, papers, advisors. They had heard speeches before. They had seen firebrands, theorists, and seasoned patriots. But today was different. Jasmine Crockett stepped through the entrance, not with flair, not with fury, but with calm that felt like incoming thunder. No entourage, no written notes, just the deep blue blazer she always wore, her silver vote pin glinting against the collar like quiet defiance. Her hair was pulled back, tightly braided, but her voice would not be. She approached the podium, microphones adjusted, lights focused. Reporters scribbled, expecting a moment, but Jasmine stood still, longer than anyone expected. The silence wrapped the room in friction. She wasn't performing. She was preparing to carve clarity into the nation's bones. I was invited here, she began, her voice steady, not raised, to speak about the role of generations in public policy. But I'm not here to describe a demographic trend. I'm here to confront a democratic emergency. Eyes lifted. Pens paused. She continued, we are a nation that funds prisons more swiftly than public schools, that dismisses emotion as weakness and regards pain as inconvenience. That says, respect your elders, but rarely asks them to respect the world the young are forced to inherit. Her tone didn't rise, but it pierced. We are standing on legislation built decades ago for a country that no longer exists, and when we try to challenge it, we're told it's not our turn. I'm here to say, our turn began the moment we started paying the cost. The senators shifted. Some stiffened, others leaned in. A few younger aides near the back scribbled furiously. Jasmine moved closer to the microphone, not for amplification, but for intimacy. I was called too loud, too angry, too emotional. But let me ask you, how quiet should one be when a school child passes out in July because air conditioning isn't seen as a right? Her voice sharpened, not to accuse, but to awaken. How calm should a mother be when her child's school library is replaced with QR codes because books are deemed too expensive, but bullets never are? A murmur spread across the chamber. Jasmine didn't flinch. And I was told, by someone who once symbolized American grit, that leadership comes from silence, from sacrifice, from knowing when to step back. Well, I've sacrificed. My mother worked nights as a nurse until her legs swelled and her back curved into a question mark. I've stepped back, plenty of times, from jobs, from meetings, from respect I had earned. But I've never been silent, and I never will be. She paused, looked out, not just at senators, but through the lens of every camera broadcasting the hearing across the country. Clint Eastwood was invited today. He declined. He said, quote, that fight's not worth it. Jasmine let that statement hang in the air, heavier than any accusation. To those who believe that the fight for equality, access, inclusion, and representation is not worth it, let me assure you, it's not because the battle is beneath them. It's because they fear losing it. That line drew a visible reaction. The older senators stirred. Some bristled, some blinked, but no one interrupted. People don't fear loud women because we're chaotic. They fear us because we are clear. Clear about what is broken, clear about what we remember, clear about what we will no longer tolerate. And then Jasmine did something unexpected. She smiled, softly, not with triumph, but with belief. I'm not here today just as a congresswoman. I'm here as someone who still remembers sitting in a school hallway, writing poems in the margins of worksheets, wondering if anyone would ever hear my voice. I'm here because I know there's a girl doing that right now. And if this chamber has the courage to invest in her future, not just honor someone else's past, then we can finally call this democracy ours. Not borrowed, not filtered. Ours. A hush spread through the room. No one looked at their watches. She closed with a single sentence. If America has room for guns in budgets, prisons in suburbs, and monuments to men who never imagined women like me standing here, then it better have room for our voices in the rooms where policy is born. She stepped back from the microphone. No applause, no music cue, just a silence so complete it felt sacred. A silence that had nothing to do with intimidation and everything to do with reverence. Because this time Jasmine didn't win with volume. She won with vision. The room never applauded, but it didn't need to. The weight of Jasmine's words echoed louder than any standing ovation. And as she stepped down from the podium, it wasn't just a moment that ended, it was an era. She descended the marble steps of the chamber without haste, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. No cameras rushed her, no staffers swarmed her. There was no chant, no raised fists, no orchestrated celebration. And yet something in the air shifted, like the hush after a storm that changes the landscape forever. Jasmine Crockett did not walk out of that hearing room with applause. She walked out with the future watching her. A young page opened the side door, hands slightly trembling. He had seen senators leave in pride and others in shame, but never like this. Jasmine met his eyes for a second, just long enough to offer a small nod. A nod that said, "Yes, you saw it. You're part of it now." Outside, the sun was beginning to set. The marble columns of the Capitol cast long, golden shadows across the steps, and the sky burned in the streaks of orange and defiant crimson. Reporters stood in silence. The usual frenzy had paused. They had all recorded something that could not be edited down into sound bites, only replayed in full. One of them finally broke the silence. "Congresswoman Crockett, any final words?" She turned only slightly, her voice low and firm. "I'm not sorry I was heard. I'm sorry it took until 2025 for a moment like this to happen." And with that, she walked past the microphones, straight into history. Across the country, the ripple became a wave. That evening, the Washington Sentinel ran a front-page spread with a photo of Clint Eastwood and Jasmine Crockett in split frame. Two generations frozen in conflict. The headline didn't scream. It whispered, "Clint brought legacy. Jasmine brought tomorrow." It was poetic but not flattery, a quiet acknowledgement that something irreversible had occurred. Not a victory, not a toppling, but a transition. The kind of shift that doesn't roar in real time, but redefines the air we breathe afterward. The networks tried to frame it in opposite tones. Fox ran with, "Respect eclipsed by rebellion." CNN declared, "A voice that changed the room." But no Chiron, no analyst, no partisan filter could fully reclaim what had happened. It had already escaped the spin cycle and lodged itself into public memory. In living rooms and classrooms, cafes and barbershops, people replayed that final line. Some wrote it down. Others whispered it to themselves, as if confirming it had really been said. "I'm not sorry I was heard." Some called her reckless. Some called her revolutionary. But no one called her forgettable. In a suburban kitchen in Detroit, a mother folded laundry while her teenage daughter, eyes wide, watched the hearing clip again on her cracked iPad. "She talks like you do, Mama," the girl said. The mother smiled but didn't reply. There were no words for that kind of recognition. In a high school in Arizona, a government teacher erased the day's lesson and played the full 23-minute hearing instead. "Forget your textbooks," she told her class. "This is civics." And on a rural porch in Texas, an old veteran who had once voted for Clint leaned back in his chair, took a long sip of coffee, and said to no one in particular, "Well, damn, maybe it is their turn." There were no fireworks, no ticker tape, no statue unveiled. Just a silent understanding, passing from one hand to the next, like the moment in a relay where the baton changes runners, not with noise but with perfect timing. Some called it the end of Clint Eastwood's influence. Others saw it as Jasmine Crockett's rise. But most would later agree. It wasn't a conquest, it was a handoff, and it could not be taken back. Thank you for watching until this moment, and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.